Hey guys, tonight, we're slipping into the soot-caked boots of someone who probably smells like burnt hair and regret. You're a medieval blacksmith, and not the glamorous kind who makes legendary swords or saves kingdoms. No, you're the kind who gets up before the rooster, hobbles down to a cold stone forge with splinters in your socks, and spends the next 12 hours convincing hot metal not to destroy you. The anvil isn't just waiting, it's mocking you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so drop your city and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The darkness of the pre-dawn air isn't peaceful. It's damp. It smells like moldy hay, charcoal dust, and sheep that have slept too close. You swing open the rickety wooden door of your forge and get slapped in the face by the faint memory of yesterday's sweat. That smell never leaves. You light the embers you buried the night before, hoping they've kept their sleepy glow. They haven't. So you blow into the coals with cracked lips till your lungs protest. You might be too tired to think straight, but you're not too tired to sweat. That's the magic of medieval blacksmithing. Your muscles ache before the hammer even leaves the wall. Every inch of your body is stiff shoulders that creak, elbows that throb, knees that might as well be medieval hinges. You slept on straw that pokes you like a judgmental hedgehog. And your dreams were filled with the rhythmic clang of hammers. There's no such thing as a quiet night in a blacksmith's head. The first iron bar of the day is as cold and stubborn as your apprentice's attitude. You toss it into the coals and stoke the fire with one hand while wiping sweat from your brow with the other. A mistake already, your fingers are black with soot, and now your forehead is too. Good morning. As the fire grows, you grab the bellows, basically an accordion for fire, and begin the steady whoosh whoosh that breathes life into the forge. It's like CPR for flames, except instead of saving a life, you're just trying to survive the day. You pump it until your arms burn. Some say bellows work the upper body. You say bellows work your soul down to a nub. And then comes the first hiss. The iron bar is glowing red, like a demon's toothbrush. You pluck it out with tongs that don't quite grip right, because of course the hinge is loose again. And that means the next 30 minutes will be you wrestling with a blazing hot tantrum of metal, trying to hammer it into the vague shape of a horseshoe or a nail or something the village drunk thinks he needs for his wheelbarrow business. You strike once, then twice. The third hit lands wrong and sends a flake of burning scale toward your exposed forearm. It sizzles on your skin like bacon on a pan. Congratulations, you're now awake. Now let's be clear. Most of what you're making isn't dramatic. It's nails, hinges, and tools. Not swords, not crowns, not anything that gets displayed in a tapestry. You're the Amazon Prime of the 13th century, minus the 2-day shipping or the health insurance. And yet everyone assumes you're rolling in coin. After all, metal is expensive and people think fire equals power. Right, nope. You're constantly bartering for scraps. Your latest order of iron came rusted and half gone. The supplier says it's discounted. You say it's garbage. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were considered craftsmen or just glorified laborers. What's certain is that your hands are cracked, your shoulders are lopsided, and your neighbors think you have mysterious fire powers, which, let's face it, doesn't help when their cows get sick. Ask the blacksmith, they whisper. He knows things. You don't. You know how to burn your own eyebrows off. Let's not even talk about fashion. You wear the same thing every day, a scorched tunic, thick apron, and boots that make every step sound like thunder. You're covered in soot and look like you fought a volcano, which you kind of have. The only bright side, nobody expects you to smell nice. Occasionally, you look at your own reflection in a warped piece of polished steel and wonder what your life could have been. Maybe a scribe, maybe a shepherd, but here you are, swinging a hammer against an anvil over and over in a hotbox of misery. One of your eyes twitches every time a spark lands on your beard. And it always does. A fun fringe fact, some blacksmiths used to urinate on their tools to temper them. That's right, there's a theory that ammonia helped with the quenching process. So if you thought hammering glowing iron was wild, imagine doing it while peeing on your workbench. Nothing like multitasking in the name of metallurgy, but that's not your style. You're just trying to get through the morning without breaking anything or anyone. Because by the time noon hits, you'll be behind schedule 3 orders deep and out of patience. And if the wheelwright shows up with another urgent request, you might just forge a perfectly sharpened no thank you. Still, even in the middle of the chaos, there's something satisfying about shaping metal with your own hands. The clang of iron, the rise of steam, the glowing red that fades into sturdy black. It's almost poetic. Almost. But your back hurts too much to notice. The door creaks open. A child pokes their head in and runs away giggling. You probably look like a soot-drenched monster from a bedtime story. You are. Just one who can make nails. And the worst part, this was the easy part of your day. By mid-morning, your forge has officially turned into a sauna for the damned. Not the peaceful kind of sauna with eucalyptus steam and ambient music. This one hisses, belches, and occasionally coughs sparks at your face, like it's trying to pick a fight. The chimney doesn't pull smoke like it's supposed to, probably because a crow built a nest in there again. So instead of the air rising neatly out of your shop, it drifts sideways and fills your lungs with a lovely mix of ash, charcoal, dust, and the eternal regret of past blacksmiths. Your eyebrows are singed. Again, you didn't even notice it happening. 1 second you were leaning in to reposition a billet, and the next, poof. The right one is gone. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the metal basin, and now you look like a medieval villain caught mid-monologue. The heat wraps around your body like an unwanted hug from an uncle who never learned boundaries. Your apron is soaked in sweat. You stopped feeling your feet an hour ago. Every breath tastes like burnt toast and molten pennies. You grab the iron with your tongs, though grab is generous. The jaws slip slightly, and the metal skids across the workbench with a high-pitched screech that makes your ears ring. It's a reminder that your tools are tired just like you. Your hammer's haft is cracked. Your punch is bent. You've sharpened your chisel so many times, it's more of a suggestion than a blade. But new tools, forget it. Too expensive. So you wrap things in leather, prop them with twine, whisper apologies to the forge gods, and keep going. At least the fire listens. Most days. Your apprentice, if you can call the gangly teenager who's currently spilling a bucket of water over your kindling, an apprentice shuffles around like a sleepwalker. You ask him to pass you the tongs, and he hands you the broom. When you correct him, he mutters something about wanting to be a poet. Of course he does. The forge spits again. A pop, then a sizzle. Something wet must have gotten into the coals. You jump slightly, though you pretend you didn't. Wouldn't want the apprentice to think you're mortal. Historians still argue whether medieval blacksmiths had any sort of consistent safety practices. What's known is that protective gear was minimal, if it existed at all. You've got a leather apron and sheer stubbornness. No gloves, no goggles, no boots rated for magma contact. When sparks fly, you just flinch and hope. You're not just sweating, you're marinating. The smell is complex. A bouquet of damp wool, scorched beard hair, iron filings, and desperation. If there were medieval cologne, it'd probably be called Forge Number 5. You wipe your forehead again and immediately regret it. Your hands are black, your rag is dirtier, and now your face looks like abstract charcoal art. The forge isn't just hot, it's alive. It groans, cracks, roars. Sometimes in the long hours, you imagine it whispering to you, telling secrets about ancient blades and forgotten weapons. Maybe it's the heat, maybe it's the lack of sleep, or maybe it's just what happens when you stare into fire for too long. You start to see things. Shapes, eyes, dragons made of flame. You blink and they vanish. Probably fine. Your stomach growls, but food will have to wait. The village reeve stopped by earlier to drop off an urgent job, 2 hinges and a door latch for the manor's storage shed. The manor, you note, where the wine never runs out and the floors are paved with tile. You'll be paid in goodwill and the vague promise of future favor. Translation, nothing. As you heat the iron rod for the latch, you glance outside. The sun is high now, turning the dust in the air into a golden haze. But inside, it's just gray and red. Smoke and embers. You feel like a loaf of bread in an oven. A loaf with lower emotional stability. You reach for the tongs again, and they slip. The glowing metal bar drops onto the floor with a hiss and a small explosion of sparks. You curse under your breath, just loud enough that the apprentice hears, but quiet enough that the local priest won't show up for a conversation. You fish the metal off the floor and plunge it into the water trough, watching steam blossom like a ghost's sigh. A fringe practice rare, but real, was the use of animal blood in quenching certain blades. Not that you do it, but some blacksmiths believed it added strength or imbued the weapon with the spirit of the beast. You think that sounds like a good way to ruin your shoes and smell even worse than usual. Still, stories like that persist. Blacksmiths were seen as half craftsman, half sorcerer. People whispered about what you could do with iron and fire. That maybe you could bend fate along with steel. If only. There's a brief lull in the chaos. You lean against the wall and listen to the creak of the rafters. Somewhere, a bird sings just one note and then silence. You don't sit. Sitting is dangerous. If you sit, you might not stand up again. You stretch your shoulders, roll your neck, try to blink the ash out of your eyes. The apprentice finally hands you the correct tool. Progress. You nod and say nothing. Praise is earned, and besides, you're not sure your voice works anymore. It's coated in smoke. You drink a bit of tepid water from a leather flask and wonder vaguely how many sparks you've inhaled today. Probably enough to forge a small nail in your lungs. Outside, someone yells. The market is in full swing. Chickens squawk, children squeal. Someone is selling onions by shouting aggressively about onions. You could be there wandering in the sun, eating something that isn't bread crust or disappointment. But no, you're here sweating into your boots, making hinges for people who will forget your name the moment the door closes behind them. Still, you lift the hammer and keep going. Because that's what you do, one strike at a time. Iron doesn't shape itself, and unfortunately, it never stops needing shaping. The handle of your hammer is warm from constant use, warmer than it should be, considering you've barely put it down since breakfast. Not that you had a proper breakfast. You gnawed on a crust of yesterday's bread while heating the forge. And that was about as luxurious as your mornings get. Now your hands wrapped in calloused skin and permanent soot close around the haft, like it's just another finger on your body, an extension of who you are. Today's task is tool repair. Specifically, a scythe blade that snapped clean through, though you suspect snapped, is generous. The thing looks like it was run over by a cart full of rocks, and then politely handed to you with, "Can you fix this before sunset?" That's the catch. They always want it before sunset, as if the sun respects blacksmithing deadlines. You prop the blade on the workbench, examine the jagged break, and sigh with the weary dignity of a man who's seen too many broken tools and not enough gratitude. You grab your fuller, a rounded tool used to shape metal, and set it next to the anvil. Then comes the rhythmic cycle again. Heat the metal, watch it glow, strike it into submission. Over and over. The anvil rings out with every blow echoing down the road, like a stubborn church bell no one asked for. The apprentice flinches each time, which is mildly satisfying. He'll get used to it or he won't. Either way, you won't stop hammering. The forge coughs again. It always does this around midday when the coals are deep and sulking. You jab it with a poker, whispering threats. The flames crackle in reply, perhaps amused, or perhaps hungry. You wonder briefly whether forges could have feelings. If so, yours is probably bitter, temperamental, and secretly judgmental. Kind of like your cousin. As you work the scythe into something vaguely useful, your tools betray you, one by one. The punch slips. The chisel skips across the surface like it's had enough of your nonsense. You grit your teeth and grab your file. The handle's splintered. You file anyway. There's an old superstition still whispered in some corners that blacksmiths' tools remember their use. That if you mistreat them, they'll turn against you just a little. A missed strike, a cracked edge, a toe crushed under a mysteriously dropped hammer. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief or just a poetic way to complain about workplace accidents. You don't care either way. You talk to your tools all the time, not kindly, but often. When the blade is finally respectable again, not perfect but functional, you set it aside and move to the next disaster. A barrel hoop bent like a question mark. Simple job, easy fix. Except nothing is ever simple when your tongs have a loose rivet and your vise wobbles like a drunk goat. You pound out the hoop while muttering under your breath. Not curses, exactly just noises. Little groans of frustration, like punctuation for each strike. Your apprentice wisely stays silent. He's sweeping now, which is adorable since he's sweeping soot from a floor made of soot. The air grows thicker as the afternoon drags on. You don't have a clock, but you can feel the time in your spine. Every vertebra is a sundial of agony. You try to shift your weight, but your knees crack like old timber. You pause only to stretch your fingers, which crack too. You suspect you may actually be 400 years old. There's no formal training for this. You learned through muscle memory and the occasional blow to the head. You apprenticed under a man who only had 3 teeth and a fondness for throwing tongs when he was angry. Good times. You suppose you're kinder, but only because tongs are expensive. A courier stops by in the late afternoon, a boy no older than 10, panting and sweating, and carrying a message sealed with wax. Some noble's estate needs 5 iron spikes, 3 gate hinges, and something ornamental, preferably with dragons. Of course they do. You take the scroll, nod vaguely, and pretend you're not dying inside. Dragons. Sure. Let me just sculpt mythical creatures out of recycled horseshoes, while also making 47 nails and a bucket handle. No problem. You step outside to clear your lungs. The street is quieter now, shadows lengthening, villagers returning from the fields. A dog ambles by, tail wagging. You envy that dog. He looks clean. You glance down at your own arms, soot-streaked, bruised, sweating through linen, and decide not to look any further. Ignorance is cleaner. Back in the forge, you examine your tools again. Everything's chipped, dulled, dented. You're not sure what's more tired, your hammer, your body, or your soul. You grab a rasp and try to fix the vice grip. The rasp's edge bites into your palm. You don't even flinch. Pain is just background music now. A quirky little fact: some blacksmiths believed iron had spiritual properties, that it could ward off evil, drive away fairies, or purify bad luck. That's why people nailed horseshoes over doors. Not for luck, but to keep spirits out. You think about that sometimes, while hammering nails, wondering if some peasant is sleeping soundly tonight because of a bent bit of metal you shaped while half asleep and 3/4 cranky. You make a few more things before the light begins to fade: a cleaver handle, a door latch, a poker for the baker. Each piece is small, forgettable, but you know they matter. Without them, the bread burns and the barn door swings open. The farmer's life crumbles just a bit more. You are not a hero, but you are the reason the village works at all. Still, there's no ceremony, no applause. You finish the cleaver handle, dunk the final piece in the water trough, and watch the steam rise like a tiny ghost floating up and out through the rafters. Then you sit just for a moment and stretch your legs. They don't like it. Your knees crack again. You stare at the coals, orange, soft, alive, like little eyes blinking slowly. They'll cool down soon. You'll bury them in ash, try to keep a spark for morning. Then it all starts again, and through the settling haze of smoke and silence, you realize you've somehow made it through another day, with only 3 minor burns and 1 splinter in your forearm. A personal best. The moment you think the day might calm down just a little, just enough to breathe, a shadow darkens the doorway. You don't have to look up to know it's trouble. Trouble wears polished boots and a smug expression. Trouble says things like, "I have a commission for you," and then unrolls a parchment so long it could double as a tablecloth. It's the night steward again. Not the knight himself, of course. No noble ever steps inside your forge unless there's a ceremonial sword to collect or a portrait to pose for. This man, thin, precise, always smiling without warmth, reads the list as if he's hosting a banquet, not assigning 3 days of back-breaking labor. 1 spearhead, 2 bridle bits, 5 spiked nails for the drawbridge gate, a replacement breastplate clasp, and, oh, his lordship has requested some embellishments. Fleur-de-lis, if possible, with symmetry. You nod slowly, not because you agree, but because it's the safest way to suppress a scream. The steward says you'll be handsomely compensated, but you know that means you'll get paid in obscure coinage and forced smiles. You're still waiting on payment from the last job they deemed an honor. This one will probably be labeled a privilege. Still, you take the parchment, carefully fold it, and place it next to your anvil. It joins a small stack of other obligations, each one a silent folded weight, pressing down on your day, your week, your spine. The apprentice peers over your shoulder, gulps, and retreats. You begin with the spearhead. It's basic, but must be flawless. The steward will inspect it like a jeweler inspecting a diamond, except he knows nothing about metallurgy and everything about disappointment. You heat the iron hammer at flat to shape it to a precise taper. The rhythmic pounding starts again, echoing like a heartbeat through the forge. Some days you forget what silence sounds like. There's a moment just as the iron glows, that deep orange, not quite red, not quite yellow when it becomes obedient. That's the moment you wait for. Not too hot, not too cool. That middle space where the metal listens. If you miss it, it stiffens. If you rush it, it warps. You can't teach this. You feel it in your bones, like a second sense. It's the only magic you believe in. The spearhead takes shape slowly, then suddenly. You quench it in the water trough and feel the steam kiss your face. It smells like effort, like rusted rain. You check the edge, the point, the balance. Not bad. Then it's on to the bridle bits. Smaller, fiddlier, likely to snap if you so much as sneeze at them wrong. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths truly held power in feudal villages, or were just one step above a mule. You've read none of those debates, but you live the question daily. Some villagers fear you whispering about fire and metal and unholy strength. Others treat you like a public servant with a hammer. And still others don't see you at all, just the work you make, like your hands are machines instead of flesh and bone. The spiked nails are next. Those at least are honest work. You hammer the heads flat, taper the shafts, and punch holes in the wide ends for bolts. Each one needs to be the same, but also slightly different. Nothing is truly uniform. Not here. You finish them quickly, proud of the balance, until you realize you've forgotten to eat again. A crust of bread appears. The apprentice, perhaps trying to avoid more sweeping, offers it like an olive branch. You take it, chew slowly, and realize it tastes like ash. You don't mind. Everything tastes like ash. Then comes the hardest part, the clasp for the breastplate. Tiny, delicate, unforgiving. One wrong strike and the whole piece crumples like dried parchment. You take your time. You speak to it quietly under your breath. Not words, just sounds. A hum, maybe. A rhythm. It helps. You're not sure why. There's an old fringe belief, likely born from bored mines near the fire, that blacksmiths could speak to metal. That it heard you, felt your intent, remembered your failures. Some even claimed naming your tools made them work better. You never named your hammer, but you've thought about it. You think it'd be something simple, like weight, or enough. The decorative flourishes come last. Fleur-de-lis, they said, with symmetry. You curse softly. Ornamentation is an art, and you are not an artist. Still, you fetch your chisel's brush off your punch plates and begin the slow, agonizing task of carving designs into steel. It's less like sculpting and more like a stare down with metal. You blink too hard, you slip. You rush, it bends. You hesitate, the chisel bounces and ruins everything. You manage 2 halfway decent flourishes before your hand starts to cramp. You shake it out, roll your wrist, and curse again when your elbow pops. One more flourish, just one more. You lean in, chisel raised, and then your apprentice sneezes. You flinch. The chisel skids. The metal glares. You stare at the mess, exhale like a deflating wineskin, and start over. Your apprentice stammers an apology, then wisely vanishes. You mutter something unprintable and wipe your forehead with the inside of your elbow. New streaks of soot. Of course. When the clasp is finally done, symmetrical enough for nobility, at least you lay everything out on the bench. The spearhead, the nails, the bits, the clasp. You don't admire them. You just acknowledge their existence. They'll be picked up tomorrow, probably late. Maybe they'll praise your skill. Maybe they'll forget who made them the moment they leave. It doesn't matter. You did the work. It's yours. For now. Outside, the sky's darker. Evening winds carry the scent of roasted onions, wet stone, and something floral. You remember suddenly that life continues outside the forge. Children still play. Couples still argue. Chickens still steal unattended bread. You pour a small basin of water, rinse your hands, and watch the black rivulet swirl like ink. Your palms look older than you are. Your nails are cracked. You fish out a splinter with your knife tip and flick it into the coals. The forge hisses in reply. The apprentice returns with a broom and the nervous air of someone who's considering life choices. You nod once. He sweeps again. And just like that, the noble's commission is done. One more job ground into the long, smoldering memory of your forge. Tomorrow it'll be something else. A broken lock, a gate chain, a horseshoe for a donkey with attitude. But tonight you rest. Or you try to. You close the forge doors just enough to block the wind, but not so much that you can't still feel the night air. It's heavy with dew, and the coolness rolls over your face like a damp cloth. Relief, but only partial. Your shirt clings to your back stiff with sweat and soot. The kind of discomfort you've gotten used to just another layer in the blacksmith's uniform. You lower yourself onto the wide stone step outside the shop elbows, on knees head bowed. Your hands dangle there like spent tools, fingers twitching from phantom strikes. The anvil still rings in your ears, a dull echo that lives behind your eyes, as if your skull remembers every blow you've delivered since sunrise. And through all that, your stomach growls again, louder this time, with the sheer boldness of someone who's been ignored too long. You pull out the last of your cheese, hard as a roof tile, and nibble a corner. It tastes like salt smoke and self-pity. But it's food, kind of. Footsteps crunch nearby. Not the rhythmic thump of boots or the shuffle of slippers, more of a chaotic slap-slap like a goose trying to learn ballet. It's the miller's boy barefoot again, barreling toward your shop with something wrapped in cloth. He skids to a stop in front of you, panting, and thrusts the bundle into your arms like it's cursed. A pot hook, broken clean in half. Ma'am says she needs it by morning, he huffs. Says to say please. You raise an eyebrow. That's new. Normally, they skip right to demands. You sigh-nod and stand up, back into the forge. The apprentice groans somewhere behind the grindstone. He thought you were done. You thought you were done. Nobody's ever really done. The hook repair takes only a few minutes, but it's enough to restart the cycle reheat. The coals reposition the tongs, relight the ache in your shoulders. You weld the pieces with practiced ease, but your eyes sting your lungs, protest, and your spine feels like it's made of misaligned plowshares. You glance at the apprentice. He's collapsed near the coal bin, half asleep, mouth open. You should yell. But you don't. Not tonight. Back at the workbench, you inspect your hammer again. The handle's slick now, not from oil or sap, but from the natural polish of your own hands. It fits you too well. Maybe dangerously so. You've been gripping this tool for so long, it might as well be part of your body. There's something bittersweet about that. Most people leave something behind when they're gone. A journal, a recipe, a song. You'll leave hand-forged hinges and nails buried in the doors of houses no one will remember. Pieces of your soul hammered into things that won't even know your name. Historians still argue whether medieval blacksmiths were literate. Some say the craft required record-keeping lists of clients and materials. Others insist most worked by memory alone, passing knowledge by hand and flame. You don't write much. You couldn't if you wanted to. Your fingers aren't built for ink. They're meant for iron. Eventually, the pot hook is cooled and ready. You hand it back to the boy who stares at it like it's magic. Maybe it is. To him, you just fixed dinner. You nod toward the door, and he bolts off with a thank you, master, trailing behind him. Master. You chuckle. If only he saw you an hour ago, scraping soot out of your eye with a piece of straw. Inside, the forge has settled. The coals dimmed to a soft orange heartbeat. You rake them gently, spreading ash across the embers to hold the warmth until morning. You do it every night. A ritual, like tucking in a sleeping giant. Your apprentice, now snoring openly, twitches at the sound of the rake. You leave him there. The floor is hard, but youth is resilient. You remember sleeping on stone when you were his age. Back when your back didn't sound like cracking ice every time you stood. You light a stub of tallow candle and retreat to your small corner of the workshop, the so-called living quarters. It's little more than a cot, a chest, and a wooden stool with a single cracked leg. but it's yours. And it doesn't ask for more hinges. As you sit, boots off ankles, pulsing with the familiar fire of overwork, you consider the simple cruelty of your trade. You create. You build. You shape the world with your bare hands. But it demands everything from you, flesh, bone, breath. In return, it gives just enough to keep you coming back. You stretch out on the cot, pull a thin blanket over your shoulders, and close your eyes. Your body aches in 17 different ways. You count them instead of sheep. You get to 11 before someone knocks. You don't move. Another knock. Then the voice of the tanner's wife, muffled and apologetic. "Sorry to bother, but the latch on our gate." You grunt. She hears. She waits. You sit up, feet back on the cold floor. One more job. By the time you make it to the tanner's place, the stars are high. The moon is a smudge behind low clouds, and your legs have taken on the wobbly determination of a cow on stilts. The village is quieter now, windows shut, dogs curled in doorways, chimney smoke trailing upward like tired prayers. Your breath steams in the cold, but your body's still furnace warm from the forge. You walk slowly, carrying your satchel of tools like it's a bag of stones. Heavy in the literal sense, yes, but heavier in what it represents. Work that never ends. The gate latch in question is hanging on by a single rusted nail, tilted like it's drunk and holding onto the fence for balance. The tanner's wife greets you with a sheepish smile and a lantern. Her husband's not home, still in the fields, she says. You nod and crouch by the gate without a word. The latch groans as you lift it free. It's warped, swollen from years of rain and neglect. Of course it is. Everything breaks eventually, especially if you're the one expected to fix it. You draw out a file and begin smoothing the twisted edge. The rasping sound cuts through the night, like a cricket with anger issues. Somewhere behind you, a chicken shuffles in its coop. You resist the urge to speak to it. Not because it's strange to talk to animals, but because the chicken might actually respond, and you're not sure you can handle that tonight. The tanner's wife lingers in the doorway, probably wondering if she should offer you something. She doesn't. You don't blame her. No one knows how to treat the blacksmith, too important to ignore, too grimy to embrace. You exist in this strange middle space, useful but uninviting. A man of fire, always a little too close to the edge of something they don't understand. You finish the latch. It isn't pretty, but it works. You test it twice, then thrice, before stepping back and giving a low grunt of approval. The woman thanks you in the way people do when they're embarrassed they had to ask. You nod again, wave her off when she offers a few coins, and head back to your forge in silence. It's not that you're above payment. It's just that by this hour, your dignity is too exhausted to care. Back home, the apprentice is still asleep, curled like a cat under your workbench. You step around him carefully, not out of kindness, but because you don't want to trip. You stow your tools, wash your hands in the bucket of lukewarm water, and finally return to your cot. This time, you don't count your aches. You close your eyes and vanish. When you wake, the fire's gone out completely. The shop is cold and shadowed. A breeze slips through a crack in the wall and whispers across your face. You groan and sit up, bones popping like gravel under a wagon wheel. It's still dark, still quiet, but you have to start early if you want to get ahead of today's misery. You prod the ashes in the forge. No spark. You reach for your flint, your fingers numb and clumsy. The first few strikes bounce off the stone like the universe is mocking you. The fourth one catches. A small ember. You blow gently, coaxing it like a reluctant candle, and finally the fire begins to stir. It'll take a while before it's strong enough to work with, so you use the time to sharpen your tools. There's something oddly satisfying about wetting a blade. the soft hiss of metal on stone, the feel of resistance fading. It's one of the few things you can control. A dull chisel becomes sharp. A bent punch becomes true. Unlike people, unlike days. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths in small towns were considered craftsmen, tradesmen, or something closer to magicians. You suppose it depends on the town. In yours, you're a little bit of everything. Fixer of tools, maker of hinges, resurrector of broken iron, provider of heat light and vaguely terrifying noises at all hours. Your next customer is the baker's cousin, an oaf of a man with a lantern, a broken cart axle, and the kind of voice that implies he's never whispered in his life. He insists on showing you the axle damage right there in your doorway, as though you haven't seen 100 just like it. You nod along, listening without listening, noting the way the wood's splintered and the iron collar is twisted like a bottle cap. You tell him it can be fixed by mid-afternoon if he leaves you alone and doesn't hover. He nods, says something about fair price, and disappears back into the frost-laced morning. You lift the collar onto the bench. It's a simple enough repair if you can keep your tools in line. You're halfway through reworking the iron when a nail snaps out of your punch and bounces off your apron. You find it in the dirt, slightly bent, slightly smug. You roll your eyes and mutter to yourself, not angrily, just mechanically. There's a theory fringe rarely written down that blacksmiths slowly go mad from the repetition. Not from the work itself, but from the clang, that endless echo, the ring of the anvil, the hiss of the quench, like water dripping, always dripping inside the head. You think about that sometimes. Wonder how long until you start hearing the forge talk back. By noon, the collar is fixed. You wipe your brow with your sleeve and realize too late that your arm is soaked in sweat and grease. Now your face feels like someone smeared bacon across it. You consider cleaning up, but you're already halfway to starting the next project. And anyway, you've smelled worse. The apprentice is awake now, yawning so hard it sounds like he's trying to swallow his own face. You hand him a list of tasks: sweep the floor, oil the hinges on the back door, fetch more charcoal from the shed. He nods, and you watch him go, arms flailing slightly like a scarecrow on a windy day. Back at the bench, a pile of nails waits to be finished. You hammer them out one by one. It's hypnotic. So much so that you almost forget to eat. Again, almost. The smell of something vaguely edible finally pulls you away from the forge, a scent hovering between burnt onion and stale pastry. The baker's daughter has dropped off a thank you gift for fixing the cousin's axle. A meat pie if you're being generous. If you're being honest, it's more like a warm brick with ambition. Still, your standards are low, and your stomach has been making whale sounds for an hour. You bite into it cautiously. The crust shatters like pottery, and the meat is mostly gristle, but you're too tired to care. It's food, and it was free. And right now, that's a small miracle. You eat sitting on an overturned bucket, watching the forge pulse like a dozing dragon. The warmth seeps back into your skin. Your bones stop rattling. For the briefest moment, it almost feels like peace. Then the church bell rings. Not for a service, not for a feast day, for a funeral. You chew more slowly. You know that sound. It's low, slow, deliberate. Someone in the village has died. You don't know who yet, but the forge has always been a strange place for news. People bring you broken things and tell you their lives while you fix them. Grief walks in disguised as errands. You'll find out eventually, probably when someone brings you nails for a coffin lid. You dust crumbs from your lap and stand up. The apprentice is fiddling with the bellows, pretending to know what he's doing. You watch him for a moment, remembering yourself at that age. You were thinner, louder, less aware of the weight life would stack on you. You take the bellows and adjust them slightly. He frowns. I thought I was doing it right. You lie. Just backwards. He grins sheepishly, and you move on. Better he learns now while the stakes are low. Later, a mistake like that could ruin a blade, or a customer's temper, or your reputation. In this trade, you don't get many second chances. Metal forgives nothing. Today's work includes a cracked cauldron handle, 2 broken hinges from the chapel's back door, and surprise, a holy relic holder that just needs to be polished, according to the priest. The relic you note is a splinter of wood, mounted in silver. You're not sure if it's from a saint's staff or the remains of an old fence, but you nod solemnly anyway. Best not to argue theology with someone who holds sway over heaven and taxes. The polishing is delicate work. You set your tools aside and use soft cloth-fine sand and patient hands. It's almost meditative. For a moment, you forget the burns on your wrists and the smoke in your lungs. You see your reflection in the silver blurred, distorted, but undeniably you. Blackened eyes, cracked lips, a smear of ash across your cheek. You wipe it off. It reappears moments later. There's an odd tension when handling religious items. On the one hand, you're trusted with sacred metalwork. On the other, you're the man covered in soot who spends his life cursing at iron. The church respects your skill, but flinches at your presence, like you might sneeze and accidentally invent heresy. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were seen as sacred workers or suspicious figures. Some say forging was considered a divine gift fire stolen from the gods. Others note how many blacksmiths were excluded from certain rites kept at the edge of town, their shops marked with talismans to keep spirits out or in. You've seen both. Some folks bring you wine on feast days, thanking you for your work. Others leave charms near your door, muttering about protection. You let them. You've got enough battles to fight without arguing superstition. Once the relic mount is polished, you pack it in cloth and set it aside for pickup. Then you turn to the chapel hinges. They're big, rusted, and covered in scratches that suggest someone's been kicking the door more often than opening it. You file them down, hammer out the bends, and straighten the plates. It's boring work. Repetitive. But you like it. There's something satisfying about taking a crooked thing and making it right. The apprentice returns with more charcoal, somehow managing to carry it and still get half of it on his shirt. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. You say nothing. He's learning. You decide to let him try the hinge repair himself. He hesitates, then steps up to the anvil. You guide his hands. The hammer rings once weakly, then again better. By the 4th strike, he finds rhythm. It's clumsy, but there's promise. You remember your own first time at the anvil, the weight of the hammer, the terror of messing up, the shock of seeing iron bend, not shatter, power and responsibility in the same moment. You did all right, you say when he finishes. He beams. It's a small thing. But so is everything at first. Later, while he sweeps and you oil the tools, the conversation turns casually, quietly to life beyond the forge. He asks if you've ever thought of leaving, moving to the city, working in a nobleman's foundry, or even a castle. You shake your head. Iron is the same everywhere, just heavier with paperwork. He laughs, but it's a real question buried in a joke. And the answer is one you rarely say aloud. You could leave, yes. But what would change? The fire would still burn. The hammer would still fall. You'd still be a man trying to shape a world that never quite fits. A quirky old tale comes to mind about a blacksmith who tried to make wings of steel to escape his village. He flew 2 feet off the ground before the weight pulled him through a barn roof. No one remembers his name. but they still point to the bent weather vane on the church tower and whisper, "That's where he landed." You finish the oiling, wipe your hands, and glance at the apprentice. He's humming now, badly, but it fills the silence. You let it. Outside, the day begins to wane. The bell tolls again, faster now. The funeral has begun. You don't know who they're burying, but part of you wonders if it's someone you spoke to last week. Someone who once asked for a poker or a nail or a knife. Someone who now lies still under wood you helped to shape. The work doesn't stop for death, neither do you. The clang of your hammer has dulled into a kind of rhythm your body knows better than language. Even now, late in the day, when your arms are more lead than flesh and your fingers are whispering threats, you keep working. Because there's a backlog. There's always a backlog. And despite your quiet fantasy of a midday nap, you've got to finish 3 nails, a plowshare, and of course, a horseshoe. Because someone's mare has a limp, and guess who's expected to fix it before sunset? The horseshoe job isn't new. You've done more of these than you can count. But each one is different. Each hoof is different. Some are cracked, some too soft, some too stubborn. And there's always that same breath of warm horse stink that follows the work no matter how far you try to lean away. The farmer shows up first, knocking on the doorframe like the building owes him rent. He's polite but urgent. Says the animal can't carry the cart until the shoe's replaced. Says he tried to fix it himself with a rock and a prayer. You nod, inspecting the half-destroyed shoe he brings. It looks like it went around with a knight's mace. You agree to the job, wave him around the side, and prepare the new iron. As the forge heats, you stretch your back with a groan that sounds like a drawbridge being winched open. Then you get to work shaping the shoe to size. You measure the curvature, account for the weight, and leave just enough give to not split the hoof. You do this all instinctively now. No rulers, no guides. Just heat hammer and hunch. The apprentice is watching. You toss him a smaller piece of iron to practice with. He fumbles it, of course. The tongs spin in his hand like a drunk baton. But he learns, bit by bit. You figure by next year he'll be good enough to ruin things properly. When the shoe is glowing red, you pull it from the coals and hold it up to the hoof. The horse doesn't care for this. She tosses her head, snorts hard enough to shake dust from the rafters, and stamps once. You soothe her with the kind of voice you use for cranky neighbors and overheated metal. Nothing kind, just steady. You fit the shoe and begin the nailing. It's delicate, precise. Drive it too hard and the hoof splits. Too soft and it falls off in a week. The horse flinches at the first strike. So do you. Not out of fear, just habit. You've seen men kicked clean across the barn by annoyed hooves. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths who shod horses were considered separate from farriers, or if in small towns like yours they were just expected to do both. In practice, there's no difference. If it's metal and it's broken, you fix it, even if it bites. The final nail goes in. You rasp the edges smooth and step back. The farmer nods satisfied and says something about bringing eggs next week. You nod. You'll believe it when you see them. Back in the shop, the light has changed. The sun has dipped far enough that the forge glows brighter than the world outside. Your shadow stretches long across the dirt floor, distorted by the curve of the anvil and the clutter of tools. You used to find this moment beautiful when fire overtakes daylight. Now you mostly find it exhausting. The apprentice is sitting on a stool, oiling a rasp. It's a mess. He's using too much. But he looks so focused you let it slide. You remember when that kind of task seemed important. Now it's just another tick on a list that's longer than your memory. You move on to the plowshare. This one's rough. The edges chipped and the tangs cracked clean through. You'll have to weld it and reshape the curve. It's the kind of job that takes finesse, not that anyone will notice. The farmer using it will only care if it breaks again. No one admires a well-forged plowshare. No one writes a poem about one. But if it fails, they curse your name, like you cursed their crops. You heat the piece and start hammering. Sparks fly. One lands on your boot and lingers like a rude guest. You shake it off and keep going. There's a quirky old belief that the sound of hammering drives off evil spirits. Some folks even hang horseshoes above their doors for luck. You wonder if they ever think about where those horseshoes came from, who burned their hands and cracked their knuckles to shape them. Probably not. You finish the plowshare just as your stomach rumbles again. There's no more pie. Just a crust in your pocket, slightly fuzzy, definitely inedible. You consider eating it anyway. Then you remember the apprentice, and your sense of dignity wins out barely. As you cool the metal, the door creaks open. A boy enters eyes wide, holding what looks like the remains of a cooking tripod. It's twisted, scorched, and missing a leg. You sigh. She dropped the pot on it, he says. Ma'am says, "Can you make it stand again?" You nod. Add it to the pile. He doesn't leave right away. Just stands there looking at the forge. "Is it alive?" he asks. You pause, then shrug. "Some days," you say. He grins satisfied and runs off. You place the broken tripod on a hook for later. The apprentice finishes oiling the rasp, somehow managing to spill half the bottle on his tunic, and looks up hopeful. What's next? You look around. At the plowshare, at the horseshoe, at the growing stack of metal to be mended, shaped, reborn. Everything you say. He doesn't groan, doesn't sigh, just nods. That might be the most promising thing he's done all week. Outside night is coming fast now. The air cools, the coals crackle, the bellows sigh. Another job begins. You lift your hammer. Again. You wake up on your cot with your mouth dry, your hands curled like claws, and your spine angrily reminding you that yes, you did fall asleep fully dressed with an iron nail still in your pocket. The forge is quiet cold even. The fire's nothing but a mound of gray ash and faint warmth, like the memory of something that used to matter. The apprentice is snoring under the bench again, tangled in a sackcloth blanket. You let him sleep. He earned it yesterday. You didn't plan to sleep at all, but your body had other ideas. Somewhere between the plowshare and the tripod, your knees gave a formal complaint to gravity, and you folded like badly drawn origami. You rise slowly, not dramatically. You don't have the energy for drama. You move like someone peeling himself out of a jar of molasses. Every joint pops like old timber in a storm. Outside dawn is stretching its arms across the rooftops. The rooster's already been at it for a while, probably competing with the neighbor's goat for the coveted title of least musically inclined creature. You splash your face with a basin of water that somehow got colder overnight. The shock wakes you faster than coffee, which doesn't exist yet, just bitterness and bread. Medieval style. You restart the forge, burying kindling deep under yesterday's ashes, coaxing flame like a parent waking a reluctant child. The bellows groan, the embers hiss, and slowly the forge breathes again. There's a rhythm to it, like always. There's comfort in repetition, even if that comfort smells like burning. Today's first task, a broken gate hook. Easy enough. Until you see it's not just broken, it's missing a third of its length. The farmer brought in a rusty stub and a hopeful grin, like you're supposed to magically guess what the rest looked like. You hold it up and squint like the answer might reveal itself if you look disappointed enough. You make a rough sketch in your head. Forge, bend, taper, punch the hole. Simple. But simple doesn't mean easy, especially when the iron you're using came from scraps left behind by someone else's project. You heat the bar, strike it methodically, reshape it into something that looks right, or at least like it belongs to the same family. There's a strange joy in rebuilding. Not crafting something new, but taking a broken thing and giving it back its shape. Its function. Its dignity. No one praises a hook that works, but everyone complains about one that doesn't. So you make it good. Quietly. Without fuss. The apprentice wakes eventually. Hair like a haystack, eyes half shut. You toss him a cloth and tell him to clean the water trough. He groans, but obeys. You appreciate that. Obedience is rarer than intelligence some days. While he works, you glance toward the shelf above the bench. It's cluttered with odd little items, a knife you made for no one. A horseshoe that bent wrong, a hammerhead that cracked down the center, but never quite fell apart. Scrap, relics, or maybe just reminders. There's one item that stands out, a delicate piece, hardly useful at all. A twisted iron spiral shaped like a flower. You made it years ago when you had an afternoon free and some notion that beauty mattered more than practicality. You kept it. No one ever asked for it, and you never sold it. It just stayed. A small piece of useless loveliness in a world of nails and hinges. The village steward drops by late in the morning. Of course he does. He doesn't knock. Just walks in like he owns the air. Says the manor needs a new gate lock, preferably ornate. He says since the bishop's due to visit in a fortnight. And maybe a key to match. Functional, but elegant, he says, as if that costs nothing in time or patience. You say yes? You always do. Then you dig through your dwindling stash of brass and curse under your breath, because ornate and functional rarely meet in the same sentence without someone suffering. You sketch a basic design with chalk on the bench, lock plates, tumbler pins, a double latch bar. It's nothing revolutionary, but it needs precision, the kind of work that demands hours of filing checking, rechecking. It's not glamorous, but it's the kind of thing that earns you a sliver of respect, if not from nobles, then at least from their guards, who don't want to spend 10 minutes jiggling a stuck key in the rain. Historians still debate whether blacksmiths were involved in fine mechanical crafting, or if locksmiths were a separate class entirely. In big cities, probably. But in villages like yours, you're everyone. Smith, farrier, locksmith, armorer, miracle worker, and occasional therapist. People tell you things when they're waiting for their tools, things they wouldn't tell the priest. You don't offer advice. You just nod, make the metal right, and let the fire carry away the rest. You spend the rest of the day on the lock, your hammer trading places with your file, your tongs with the tiniest chisel in your box. By dusk, your hands are cramping, your eyes are sandpaper, and your lower back is petitioning for early retirement. But the lock works. You test it 3 times, listen to the soft click as the mechanism catches, watch the key turn smooth as warm butter. No resistance, no snags, just quiet function. You hold it up to the light and let yourself feel. Not pride exactly, but something close. Satisfaction, maybe. Then you hear shouting outside. It's the tanner again. His boy's trapped in the shed door latch, jammed bolt bent. You sigh, grab your satchel, and head out. The shed door is solid oak, swollen from the day's humidity. The bolt's twisted halfway out of its hinge, hanging like a drunk leaning on a bar. You wedge your crowbar under the lip, tap it gently with a hammer, and pop the bolt loose. The door swings open. The boy runs out crying. You hand the bent bolt to the father without a word and return to your shop. The forge is dying down again. You bury the coals in ash and hang your tools in their usual places and sit on your stool, which creaks like it's judging you. The apprentice speaks from the doorway. Do you ever think about stopping? You don't answer right away. You look at your hands instead, scarred, stained, strong. Tools in their own right. Then you shake your head. If I stopped, you say everything else would break. He nods slowly. Doesn't ask what you mean. He already knows. The morning after rain always smells like soaked charcoal and broken promises. Your forge doesn't take kindly to moisture, none of them do. The stone sweats, the bellows sulk, and your entire shop feels like it's holding its breath. You enter to find the hearth cold again, the coals damp and pouting under their blanket of ash. You mutter something halfway between a prayer and a curse, and begin the slow dance of fire-making all over again. Your apprentice is already up, sweeping out the puddle that's gathered near the rear wall where the roof never quite seals. He's humming off-key as always, but that tiny, tuneless optimism is oddly comforting. You think you'd miss it if it ever stopped. Today you're supposed to finish a batch of nails and 3 iron hooks for the innkeeper's ceiling lanterns. He wants them strong but elegant, a phrase that seems to follow you everywhere these days. Nobles want ornament. Farmers want function. And everyone wants it cheap and ready by yesterday. You start with the nails. Simple. Repetitive, comforting in a strange way. Heat hammer, taper, snip. You could do it blindfolded now. You probably have. The apprentice watches for a moment, then gets back to shaping scrap into something vaguely resembling a hinge. You let him experiment. He needs to learn what doesn't work. Mid-morning brings a surprise. The cooper, usually a man of few words and fewer teeth, shows up with a gift. A wooden tankard bound with your own iron hoops. Thought you should have one, he grunts. Made it from the barrel that cracked last winter. She's tight now. You nod. You don't say thank you, but he knows. In this village, gratitude is passed in objects, not words. You set the tankard on the bench next to the pile of incomplete jobs and forgotten ideas. You'll use it later. Or not. Either way, it belongs here. Then come the lantern hooks. Thicker stock, more bending, careful shaping with the horn of the anvil. You work slowly, methodically, letting the iron curve into clean arcs. The first 2 go well. The third resists. It twists wrong. The bend catches. You mutter, reheat it, and try again. Eventually, it yields. They always do. Or they break. You pause to drink water from your flask and can glance toward the front of the shop. A child peers in through the open door. Big eyes. No shoes. Probably sent on some errand. You wave him away gently. He runs not out of fear, but because children move like they're being chased by invisible joy. As you return to work, you catch sight of yourself in the polished shield hanging by the doorway, an old commission no one ever picked up. You barely recognize the man reflected. Soot-smeared lines deep around the eyes, shoulders rounded like bent iron rods. You lean in, examine your beard, and pluck out a spark that landed there earlier and burned into the hair. It's charred at the tip. Just like you. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were the heart of medieval communities or merely their background noise. You don't need the debate. You live it. People pass your door every day. Sometimes they wave, sometimes they don't. But when something breaks, when a gate sticks, a shoe snaps, a tool fractures, they come here. Always. The rest of the day blurs into metal and motion. A wheel rim to patch. A belt buckle to reshape. A church bell pull rod to reforge after someone snapped it trying to show off. You complete each task without ceremony. The work is the work. It doesn't ask for applause. And then, just before sunset, the widow arrives. She's quiet. Always is. Carries a small bundle, something wrapped in cloth and tied with twine. She hands it to you gently. You undo the twine and find a broken cooking knife. The handle is cracked. The blade is notched. You've seen it before, years ago. It was her husband's. You say nothing. Just nod and take it to the bench. You don't charge her. You don't even ask when she wants it done. You just start. It takes time. You remove the old handle sand, the tang reshaped the blade edge. The notches are deep signs of long use. You wonder how many meals were made with this knife. How many times it was sharpened, passed from hand to hand. You re-harden the blade, carefully quench it, then fit a new handle of ash wood, smooth, simple, and true. When you hand it back, she doesn't cry. She just nods, turns, and walks away. That's enough. You clean the bench, wipe down your tools, and rake the coals one last time. The forge is cooling now. You let it. You let everything slow. The anvil hums with phantom echoes. The shop smells of smoke, sweat, and faint pine from the new handle. You sit, you breathe. The apprentice drags his stool over and sits beside you. He doesn't speak. He knows the hour. Outside, the village winds down. Chickens roost. Lamps flicker in windows. A dog barks once, then stops. Life settling into itself. You reach for the tankard and take a long, slow sip of water that tastes faintly of iron and wood. You hand it to the apprentice. He drinks, makes a face, shrugs. Better than river water, he says. You chuckle, barely. But it's something. He leans back and says, "Do you ever wonder what it's all for, all the hammers and smoke and sweat?" You don't answer for a long time. Then you say, "People break things. Always have. Always will. And someone's got to make them whole again." He nods slowly. "So we fix things. No, you say. We remember how to fix them." And with that you rise. The fire dims. The tools rest. The forge sleeps. And now, you're still at last. The fire has gone out. The hammer is silent. The forge breathes no more tonight. Around you, the walls of the little shop settle into darkness, creaking gently in the cooling air. Outside, the moon begins its quiet climb, casting silver light over the quiet cobbled streets, over fields now soft with dew, over roofs, where sleep drifts slowly from room to room. You lie back on your cot, just wood and straw, but right now, it feels like the whole world. Your hands, those soot-darkened hands, rest across your chest, like old tools placed gently to the side. Every ache begins to soften. Every muscle unwinds. Even your thoughts start to blur into something slower, something gentler. Somewhere in the night, the wind sighs through the trees. Maybe it's whispering your name. Maybe it's just passing through. Either way, it carries nothing urgent. Nothing loud. Just the hush of another day put to rest. You did enough. The work, the weight, the worries. They can wait. The forge will be here tomorrow. But tonight, there is only quiet. Only sleep. Let your breath slow now. Let your body melt into the stillness. And let the last ring of the hammer fade gently from your mind into dreams.